I suppose you've noticed armored vehicles like the French AMX-13 or the very iconic Austrian SK-105 Cruiser, and you've wondered about their very curious turrets. Well, to tell the truth, the French AMX-13 and the Austrian SK-105 Cruiser, as well as many other tanks from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, had an oscillating turret, that is, a turret divided into two parts, one for rotation movements and one for elevation movements. This type of turrets diverge a lot from traditional turrets, giving a lot of advantages to the armored vehicles that use them, but like everything in the world of combat armored vehicles, also many other disadvantages. And in fact, it was one of these disadvantages in particular that made these so iconic armored vehicles of the Cold War disappear. Today, we will see how these turrets work, what made them so special, and of course, the reason why they have almost completely disappeared from the world. The concept of an oscillating turret is quite simple to understand and tries to solve several problems with conventional turrets. Conventional turrets have been used since the beginning of tank history, uninterruptedly until today, and all the best modern tanks use this turret system. They consist of a single piece mounted on a ring in the tank hull, which basically gives the turret horizontal rotation. Vertical movement is achieved through the same cannon that is connected to the turret by an axis or trunnion, and the cannon can move vertically up and down, allowing the armored vehicle to aim horizontally in any direction, only limiting the elevation movements that the cannon can make so the body of the turret is fixed, and only the oscillating turret can move horizontally. Instead consists of two parts, an upper and a lower joined by an axis or trunnion. The space between these two pieces is usually covered by a visible rubber or canvas bellows, which always gives these tanks a quite curious appearance and probably makes you think that this is really a weak point, although there is still quite a lot of armor to protect the tank. At the bottom of the turret is the same as other conventional turrets. It is connected to the tank hull and provides rotation to the turret, but the upper part is where all the magic is. This is connected to the lower part by an axis or trunnion. Making that to make elevation movements, the upper part of the turret tilts completely over the trunnion, and not just the cannon as happens with conventional turrets, which makes the cannon and the turret always aligned. This curious design solved many of the problems that persist today, even in the best tanks of today. One of the advantages of oscillating turrets is that they basically allow a greater range of movement for the cannon in conventional tanks. When it needs to aim downwards, the cannon moves upwards inside the turret, making the downward movement of the cannon quite limited by the height of the turret. This is a problem on the battlefields as they tend to be irregular and could give an advantage to enemy tanks. In tanks with oscillating turrets, this is not a problem as the turret and the cannon move together on an axis, so the cannon is not so limited to aim downwards, allowing the tank to use small hills as cover in the irregular terrains of the battlefields. In theory, the downward movement limit that an oscillating turret cannon can reach is until it literally collides with the hull of the same tank. Also, oscillating turrets allow for a lot of space saving in tanks. In conventional tanks, for the cannon to have a good upper range of movement, it must have a lot of free space inside the tank. The turret ring must be quite wide to allow the upward movement of the cannon. However, in oscillating turrets, this is not the case, as since the cannon moves with the turret ring can be really small, allowing for smaller and lighter tanks. But probably the best advantage that tanks with oscillating turrets bring is the improvement of the autoloading systems. If you watch the video on this channel about the tank's autoloading systems, you probably remember the big problem these have. As you probably already guessed, the cannon of a tank with a conventional turret moves within the turret to be able to aim up and down. Auto-loading systems require the cannon to be in a straight position to be able to load them effectively. The solution that modern tanks have to this problem is simply that whenever the cannon needs to be loaded, the cannon automatically aligns with the autoloading system. Or in the case of tanks like the M1 Abrams or the Challenger 2, once the shot is fired, the cannon rises to a high position so that inside the turret the loader can more easily load the cannon without much effort. In oscillating turrets, as the cannon is always aligned with the cannon, the auto-loading systems are quite simple and do not have to make cannon movements to be able to load them, making the cannon always pointing at the target. So, if these armored vehicles were so good, why did they disappear? Basically, these armored vehicles, as much as they had advantages, they also had quite a few disadvantages. One of them was basically how little the turret could raise to aim upwards. Since the back part of the oscillating turrets tends to be quite long and bulky, and this is so in order to accommodate the autoloaders and the ammunition depot. Of the tanks with oscillating turrets, while they were quite small in general, the oscillating turret made them quite tall, giving them a larger profile to hide. But probably the most important disadvantage, and basically the one that made the oscillating turret tanks disappear, was their little protection against chemical attacks. As the turret was divided into several parts, basically the tank was impossible to isolate from the outside and therefore could not be protected against NBC-type attacks. And in the Cold War, this was a problem since the conflicting blocs were more than sure that the other had at their disposal a wide range of these types of weapons. In the end, it wouldn't matter that tanks with oscillating turrets had many more advantages than conventional ones, as the crew was always vulnerable to any type of chemical attack. Armored vehicles with oscillating turrets had a boom in the 50s to the 70s, with the French being the ones who most exploited this turret concept. The AMX-13 models were the most popular. The Americans would also create several prototypes of tanks with oscillating turrets, but none would end up entering service except for the M128 mobile weapon system with an M68A 105mm cannon, and this would be used from 1996 until 1922. But probably one of the most recognizable with an oscillating turret would be the SK-105 Cruzier, which would be put into service in 1971, and many nations like Bolivia, Argentina, and Brazil continue to use it today. Those tanks, although due to certain disadvantages they could not adapt to modern battlefields, are undoubtedly an example of true engineering, and their mark will undoubtedly remain in the history of combat armor. Thanks for watching this Guns Club video. See you in the next one.